Good day, grade 11 students of the Angeles City National Trade School, and welcome to week 2 of your classes in Oral Communication in Context. Once again, I am your teacher in OCC, Sir Reggie A. Bonifacio. I hope you learned a lot from our discussion in week 1, and we have received positive responses from you, our dear students, as you learned our lessons using our modules or learning activity sheets together with our video lessons. Hopefully, we will receive the same positive responses from you for this week 2 of our classes, which begins now. For week 2 of our discussion in oral communication in context, we will be focusing on the models of communication. For this video lesson, I will be teaching you 4 important models of communication that will help you, our learners, understand better and practice effective communication when talking and conversing with other people. For week 2 of oral communication in context, and for our video lesson for today, you are expected, at the end of this lesson, to define what communication models are. You will also enumerate and understand each model of communication that we will be discussing. And finally, you should be able to explain the differences among the models of communication. We begin our discussion by defining what models of communication are. The communication models are flowcharts, diagrams, or illustrations that describe the process of communication. They visually show the relationship among the different elements of communication, and if ever there are problems in the process of communication, these models help find and correct these communication problems. The 4 models of communication that we will be discussing today offer a visual overview of the different aspects of the communication experience. We begin by discussing the first model, which is Aristotle's model of communication. Aristotle's communication model is a speaker-centered model that includes 5 primary elements: the speaker, speech, occasion, audience, and effect. The speaker plays the most crucial and active role in the process. He or she organizes the speech beforehand and delivers it to the target audience according to the situation. The speech pertains to the message of the speaker. The purpose of the speech is to persuade the listener. The third element is the occasion, which refers to the situation or setting. It is the setting that dictates the message of the speaker. Fourth element is the audience. This refers to the recipient of the message. In this model, the role of the audience is passive, influenced only by the speech coming from the speaker. Hence, this makes the communication process in this model one direction or unidirectional, or there is only one-way flow of communication from the speaker to the audience. And the last element is the effect, which refers to the result of the communication, whether the audience was persuaded or not by the speaker. These are other representations of Aristotle's model of communication. As you can see in both diagrams, the flow of communication is one way, or what we call unidirectional. It starts with the speaker sending out a message in the form of a speech, which goes to the intended audience, who are the listeners or recipients of the message. For the effect, this will show whether the audience was persuaded and understood the message coming from the sender or the speaker. This communication process happens within a context, situation, or setting, which we call the occasion. As you can see in this example of Aristotle's flow of communication, there is a radio broadcast and a girl is listening to the radio reporter. However, the sender or the reporter cannot check whether the girl really understood the radio broadcast or the news coming from the reporter, because as you can see, this is just a one-way flow of communication. What is lacking? There is no feedback. Our model number 2 is the Shannon-Weaver model of communication. This model is known as the mother of all communication models. It depicts communication as a linear or one-way process consisting as well of 5 elements. We have the information source, which is the producer of the message. The message will be passed on to the transmitter, which is the encoder of the message into appropriate signals. The signals will then be adopted for transmission using our channel or channels. The received signal will be passed to the receiver, whose main role is the decoder of the message from the signal. And finally, the message will reach the destination, which is the ultimate receiver of the message. This model was criticized for excluding one crucial element in the communication process. It lacks feedback. Hence, the absence of feedback leaves the speaker clueless whether the recipient understands the message or not. Just like the previous model, Shannon-Weaver's model of communication is also one-way or unidirectional, or what we call a linear type of communication process. It also has 5 components. We have the source or information source, wherein he or she chooses what message he or she wants to communicate. He will send the message to the encoder or the transmitter, who will change or transform the message into a signal that will be carried by the channel or the medium. The channel or the medium will send the signal to the decoder, which will do the opposite of the encoder. After the message has been received by the decoder, it will now go to our destination, which is a person or a group of persons who are the intended recipients of the message. There is no feedback in Shannon-Weaver's model of communication, so again, the source or the speaker cannot check if the receiver or receivers understood his or her message. Another important element of this model is the noise source or barrier to the communication, which can impede or obstruct the normal and proper flow of communication. This picture example shows Shannon-Weaver's model of communication because the students, who are the intended recipients or listeners of the lesson coming from our sender or the teacher in the form of a new lesson in class, these students are not able to respond or give a feedback in the form of a recitation because they cannot understand properly the lesson because of the noisy environment. Therefore, the noise serves as a barrier to proper communication. Moving on with our third model, the transaction model of communication. In contrast to the Shannon-Weaver model, which is a one-way process, the transaction model is a two-way communication process with feedback being included as one important element. Within the operation, the sender and the receiver have the same roles. They come up with an idea, they send a message, and react to it. This model also involves noise. Noise, which is an ever-present aspect of this communication model that negatively affects the reception of the message. This is another diagram or illustration of the transaction model of communication. As you can see from these diagrams, there are two persons involved, and we call them the communicators. We have communicator A and communicator B. Whenever communicator A sends out a message, he will encode that message and send it via the appropriate channel, and it will be received by communicator B. Communicator B then will now decode that message, and once he understood that message, he will send out a feedback back to communicator A. In that process, communicator A becomes also the receiver. He or she will decode the feedback coming from communicator B. So as you can see, it is a two-way process wherein, number one, both communicators, they can check whether the other communicator has understood the message because there is a presence of a feedback. And number two, in the transactional model of communication, both communicators, they have dual roles. They are both sender and receiver, both encoder and decoder. The picture example illustrates the transaction model of communication because in here, both teachers, they serve as senders and receivers to each other's messages. As one of them sends a message, the other replies based on the message provided and vice versa. This cycle of communication is made possible through the use of what medium or channel? Of course, they are using their mobile phones. However, noise may always be present. It can be found anytime and anywhere. So in this example, a low signal or a low connection in mobile phone signal can lead to an interruption to a better reception of their conversation. Therefore, it may lead to a problem in their communication process. Mr. Frank E. X. Dance, or Frank Dance, proposed our fourth model, the helical or helical model of communication, which shows that communication is a flexible process. The use of helix illustrates that communication while moving forward is at the same time coming back upon itself and being affected by its past behavior. This model of communication encourages an upward and forward movement, unlike other models of communication. It indicates that information is growing as the contact continues. Furthermore, the helical model suggests that contact starts at birth and progresses as one grows up, and that one's responses are based on past experiences. As I've said, our final model, the helical model of communication, shows that communication progresses as one grows and develops throughout his or her life. It begins at childbirth, wherein when a child is born, the usual means by which he or she can communicate is through crying, just like whenever he or she feels pain, cold, or hunger. Now, as that child becomes older, as we grow older, our means to communicate becomes broader and it deepens. We learn language, and through language, we socially interact with other people. We establish relationships, whether they are peers or friendly relationships, professional relationships, or even marital relationships. This example shows and illustrates that the development of an individual throughout his life, throughout one person's life, it adds to his or her knowledge, and as her knowledge becomes deeper, communication as a factor in one's life to make our lives better also expands and broadens and becomes better. And now let's have a recap of what we have discussed so far for our lesson, Models of Communication. I was able to share to you information on 4 models of communication, namely Aristotle's Model, Shannon-Weaver Model, transaction model, and the helical model. Under the Aristotle's model of communication, we can describe it as being speaker-centered. It is a linear model wherein there is only one-way flow of communication consisting of 5 elements: the speaker, speech, occasion, audience, and effect. For our second model, Shannon-Weaver model of communication, it is considered as the mother of all communication models. However, it lacks an important element. There is no feedback, and like the Aristotle's model of communication, it shows a one-way flow of the communication process. Likewise, it contains 5 elements: information source, the transmitter, channel, receiver, and destination. The third one is the transaction model of communication. As opposed to the other two, this model of communication shows a two-way process, and it involves and includes an important element, which is the feedback. In this model, both sender and receiver have the same roles, and likewise, it includes noise as one of the most important elements of communication process. The last model is the helical model, which, as we've talked about a while ago, it shows that communication is a flexible process and that it is an upward and forward movement. Information grows as contact also progresses. Contact starts at birth and continually progresses and goes on during growth and development. One's responses to messages sent to him or her are based on that person's past experiences. And now, my dear students, is everything clear so far? At this point, I want to check if you really understood our lesson for week 2 in OCC. Let's move on to our question and answer portion. And now we begin with our first question. This model of communication shows that communication is a two-way process that includes feedback as an additional element. 10 seconds to think of the answer. And the answer for question number 1, transaction model of communication. I hope all of you got it correctly. Now let's move on to our question number 2. This model is regarded as the mother of all styles of communication. Your 10 seconds start now. And the correct answer is Shannon-Weaver model of communication. I hope all of you, as of now, got 2 points already. Moving on to our third question. It is an element of communication that negatively affects the proper reception of the message. This is quite easy, and the correct answer is, of course, noise or barrier. A big hand for all those who got it correctly. Moving on to question number 4. It is the most important element in Aristotle's model of communication. You know this. Your 10 seconds start now. Let's have the correct answer. Of course, it is the speaker or the sender. It is the beginning of Aristotle's model of communication. I hope you aced this question. Moving on to the last. This model regards communication as something that develops and progresses throughout our lives as we grow and develop. Your timer starts now. And now let's see the answer for our final question. Helical model of communication. My dear students, I hope you were able to get the answers correctly. Now, as you receive your learning activity sheets or LAS for week 2 of our classes in OCC, there will be more exercises for you to answer that will facilitate more learning on your part. Hopefully, you will be able to understand our lesson for week 2, which are the models of communication. Once again, this has been your teacher in OCC, Mr. Reggie A. Bonifacio. Thank you for joining our class for today. And always remember, to be a winner in life, always have courage and be kind. Good day, stay safe, and goodbye.